and welcome to Fine is a Four-Letter Word. My guest today is Kevin White. Welcome to the show, Kevin.
Thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure. We had such a good conversation in our pre-show chat, so I'm eager to see what comes out of this one.
Yeah, me too. Never know what I'm going to say.
You never know. We're going to have fun. Let's start off with, I'm curious about how you were raised and what the values and beliefs that were instilled in you as a child that contributed to who you became as you grew up.
Yeah. Well, I was raised definitely as a Christian. I think that there's a lot of different parts to that equation. Somewhere along the line, I picked up more of the judgment side of that equation than I should have. I think that might have had something to do with my family, but also had a lot to do with my personality and my searching for, what was right rather than trusting who I really was. And so then, picking different people to model and then thinking that's right, that tends to lead to a lot more judgment than just being yourself.
When you say looking for what was right, explain that a little bit more.
Well, boy, some of this I don't even know, so I'll give you what I do know as best I can. But I think that when I entered the world more with a thought of danger, having the world is dangerous, having to do with some of what happened to my mom before I was born, and I guess that's the part I do know. And so that led towards me wanting to find people that I could be close to that were safe, and then modeling those that were safe. And primarily my two models, which although there's a lot that they give me and that's positive, I'm not them, was my two grandpas. So from an energetic standpoint, I took a lot from them and tried to model my life after them. But I think the key word there is tried.
Yeah. Well, right, because we are all individuals, and so we can look at someone else and say, I admire those characteristics, or I don't care for those characteristics and I'm going to be something different. And the way it expresses itself is always going to be unique since we are all individuals. So
yeah.
But I could see how, when you're younger, you don't necessarily understand that.
Correct. Yep. And it didn't necessarily, I guess it didn't really, it did impact me younger, but it's when we get into our late 20s and beyond that it starts to really impact us, or at least it did for me.
Yeah. So tell me more about that. How did you come to that realization?
Well, through a lot of pain.
That's how a lot of us get to where we are.
So, I think that, so leading up to that, I got married when I was 20, almost 21, and my wife was 19. We really, right away, we clicked. Like the first day, we were pretty much engaged within 3 months, but we were already talking about marriage in 3 weeks in, maybe a month in. It was just very natural for us. We were very, I don't know that I necessarily believe in soulmates anymore, but I do believe in compatibility. We were very compatible. And so, but the issue that came out after our marriage was my addiction. I told her as well that I was addicted to pornography going into our marriage. And so, but we just naively in a young way, young love way, I would say, thought that wouldn't be a problem. And so it wasn't at the beginning, but then as stress started to increase after we had kids and things like that, then it was. And so it put me down a journey of trying to be what I wanted to be while still hanging on to that and still struggling with that. And so I, in my mid to late 20s, I had gotten to the point where I was making decent money finally. I had a good career. I was in IT, and I was starting to get a lot of opportunities. I'm a theoretical, so as a motivator, so my primary motivator. So I really love knowledge, and I dig into things, and so I could do well while still coping, right? Mm-hmm. And so I was checking all the boxes in my mind that were important. 3 kids. I found a few areas in my life where I was present, and so they started to add up, and I thought it was okay. But I wasn't dealing with the real problem. I mean, I convinced myself I was. I was definitely going to God. He was helping me with the issue now and then, really all the time, but I was very restricted in my asking and in my belief, let's say. So anyway, so that led me into the next stage.
Were you restricted in your asking and your belief because you didn't really want to give it up?
No, I don't think so. Technically, there's been things that I've found along the way where I didn't know the truth about something, and that was the primary issue with me giving it up. As soon as I knew the truth, then it's like, I want out of this, right? And so, what I found out in later, fast forward another 10 years, is that I had witnessed some abuse when I was a little kid, and my ability to understand what love was very small, or at least I had warped it. I thought that love was very sexual, much more than it should have been in my mind. And there were some consequences to that, and one of them was addiction.
So it took you 20 years of managing, we'll say, the addiction before. So now, did you, I don't know how to phrase it. What do you let go of an addiction? What is that I don't know the right terminology there. Yeah. Was that before or after you found out what you had seen as a child?
That was definitely before. So I didn't find that out until really in the last year. So I would say what you do is you start healing an addiction, right? Mm-hmm. So what we find, I have an addiction podcast, the Business Addicts podcast, and what we find in our interviews and just even my own work is that there's trauma behind every addiction. The trauma could be as simple as emotional abuse, although that's a lot more complicated than it sounds. That might be one of the hardest ones to deal with because it's not as obvious. And then the trauma could be just not embracing our gifts, or thinking that there's something wrong about ourselves. It starts to feel like trauma is just part of life to a certain extent. I mean, I don't think we can avoid it. But yes, how they all come together. I guess the question that led me to more of the truth was, it's very normal for a young man to be exposed to pornography. Right?
Sure.
At 11 or 12, I was exposed by a neighbor, and that's almost everyone is. No big deal. Right. Yeah. And my best friend walked away from it, and nothing's wrong with him, as far as I know. I mean, he didn't show any interest, and I did. So the question was, why? And that question led me to a lot of healing.
Yeah. So I really appreciate you coming on and talking about this, because addictions are difficult to talk about they just are, like as a whole. And then I think talking about an addiction to porn is even more difficult because society accepts it even less than addictions to drugs or to alcohol.
Yeah, that's interesting. I definitely agree with you. What I find interesting is pornography is very accepted in society, but addiction to it is not accepted.
Yes.
Right? It's interesting, isn't it? Yeah, so it is. I definitely didn't want to do this at the beginning, but as all addicts find out, the more we tell our story, the more we get help. And it's
Right.
that vulnerability is the key to unlock the the truth about us and to be, and really the shame that's behind the addiction that's keeping us trapped.
Right. And the more that people talk about it, the more it gives other people the freedom to talk about it, and
Yes.
not
Yep.
to normalize it, but to normalize the vulnerability.
Yep. Normalize the vulnerability and the fact that we can heal, and that it's yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily think we would ever like put it away on a shelf and never talk about it again, but
Yeah.
it's gone, you know. So
So you were so young when you got married. Like, that's just amazing to me, because I remember my mom telling me to not get married before I was 30, because you don't really know who you are and you haven't developed into like a full human yet. If you know, that's an ongoing entire lifetime thing, but her advice was that you really shouldn't. It would be better to wait until you were older. And I understand where she was coming from, having gotten married at 22, I think she was, and not having it work out. So I'm fascinated that you and your wife were so young, and and you're still together.
yeah, that's actually another miracle. Yes, so it's hard to know other than just the compatibility, but to a certain extent, there's a bigger plan here. Both of our moms died within a year. They were both around 45. I can't remember their exact age, in 2006 and 2007. So we got married young, and I don't know how this all works. I'm just telling you the facts, that we got married young and had kids young, and they got to have grandkids before they passed. So, you know, I don't think the result of getting married young is not all perfect, right? Like, there is more struggle, but I wouldn't trade neither one of us. I think I can talk for Jamie safely here. Would have traded that experience of being with our moms before they passed, you know, with our kids.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it definitely works for some people. I know other people that it has worked for, and then there's a lot of other rest of us who needed some extra space before we made that commitment. So
Yeah.
she knew about the addiction when you got married.
Yep.
And I guess, was it part of the naivete of being young, of not understanding what she was getting into, or what you were both getting into?
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, absolutely. And we both didn't. There was really no way for both of us to know, you know.
Course.
And certainly, I wouldn't have told. You know, that's the thing. I think if it's possible to, you know, to impact other people on this, like, we need to ask our kids. We need to, especially males, but even females, we need to have this conversation more broadly, and that's the only way we're going to address it, because most people are not going to reach out to you about this type of addiction. It's very shame-ridden. They won't do that very easily about alcohol, but definitely less about this.
Yeah.
So.
But then, as we talked about in our pre-show call, she's the one who said no more of this. You need to.
Yep.
Yeah. She reached a point where it was becoming a problem for her.
Yeah, and I won't speak for her too much, but I'll just give you a general overview that in our podcast we talk about the addict and the enabler. Mm-hmm. And Jamie was one of those people that is still so positive about people. She's much more realistic about me now. But otherwise, with other people, she has better boundaries about herself, like about giving endlessly to people, than she used to have. But she really believes and is very forgiving. So, I mean, I can't believe how long it took us to figure some of this out, really. But yeah, I mean, if you're focused on the destination, right, like coming back to the whole purpose of your podcast, if you're just trying to be fine, which we weren't fine, we were way less than fine, but I would say fine was the goal, at least in my mind. And so behind that, there's that destination, that temptation of just going towards that destination continually, instead of really, okay, what's really possible? What could we do differently?
Yeah, I love that question of what's really possible. Because when you start asking that, opportunities come along, doors open. It's a really productive question.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how long did it was, you said 20 years before you
so I would
started
say
really digging into finding the help?
Yeah, so my help started, the years are kind of fuzzy, but let me see. I think we cover this on our podcast pretty well too, on the actual timing. But I know in 2017, 2018 is when, 2015 is when Jamie started to say, okay, so our relationship is not good for me, so I'm going to be not a typical husband and wife for a long period of time during my starting to realize where I really was. And so that led to her choosing growth and her choosing to really step into her own gifts. And that, ultimately behind everything that was going on, I always have loved her from the beginning. Mm-hmm. She was the one that I still do, obviously. It's just a powerful thing. Like her, the beam of light that was her from the beginning is something that God has used over and over, and so I think most men, if they acknowledge that, that's a powerful thing we can hang on to, and instead of being selfish, which ends up in divorce. And, I sat there several times, deciding whether I wanted to go down that road, and I just didn't feel like ultimately I would ever be a productive member of society if I couldn't figure this out, So it started with her choosing growth, starting to work out, do coaching, a bunch of different things, and really in 2017, 2018 is when that started to shift, and I got a coach, her coach actually. Everything was led by her, and then the story goes on from there. I wouldn't say it took me a few years beyond that to even get free of addiction. Not necessarily that my coach was working on that directly, but several people were helping me. I had an energy healer and him and Jamie, at least, and there was others. And then beyond that, it took the last 3 years to really work on my everything behind the addiction, all the coping, all the, there's just all kinds of mind issues because of 20 years of addiction. You really have a lot to work through.
It started, though, with you following Jamie and choosing growth.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. That's where all change happens, is choosing growth. Because what's that book? It's called Mindset, I think, by Carol Dweck. The fixed mindset or the growth mindset.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
That's right. I mean, the thing that holds us back, or at least me, back from growth is fear. It's the fear of what's on the other side of that door. And at different points, I chose that, okay, I'm afraid of what I'm going to find out, but the pain of not finding it out is greater than whatever's behind the door, right? And then that was when I stepped through. And fear is not real, obviously. It's just a figment of our imagination. But if we keep giving into it, it'll keep us fine or less for a long time.
Yeah, well, we hear that all the time, that fear is not real, but it feels real. It feels very real. And how do you convince yourself that it's not real?
Yeah. Well, that's why I think, one of the great things about this earth is that, in our lives and being a human, is that there's consequences. Like, I used to think that was terrible. I want to get rid of all of them.
Mm-hmm.
But they're here for a reason, and we get in a certain point in our life, after we've started to grow, we start to love consequences. They're good information. Like, failing fast is the best way to fail, right? Like,
Yeah.
that's what we need.
Right. They're kind of like, I don't know if guardrails is the right word, but like they show you where to go next.
Yes.
Okay,
Yep.
if I do this, this happens. If I do that, this happens. I keep saying in a lot of my episodes, I've said life is an experiment. So there
Yes.
is no failure. Yep. You just get different results than maybe what you expected. And so the consequence is, oh, I did that and that happened? Huh, interesting. What if I do this other thing? What will happen then?
Correct. Yep. Yeah, I mean, I just ran into something this week that was very draining, and I couldn't figure it out right away. It took me a couple days, and as soon as I understood what it was like, oh man, that makes sense. That's exactly what I need to know to move forward. And that's after changing thousands of beliefs and millions of memories and cellular issues, and emotions, and just tons of growth that I've done in the last few years, especially in the last year. It's accelerated, and it really does. I mean, if you think about it, if we're going to step into where our calling is and really be all we're able to be, at least I always thought like there'd just be this magic moment and you step through a door and then everything's good, right?
Yeah,
but
wouldn't
that's just
that be
not the way it is. Yeah. Ultimately, it's like we choose to step through the door and then there's growth forever, right? Like, it's not going to stop. Maybe our growth will be more related to other people than ourselves at a certain point, but we're not going to be able to know when that point is.
Yeah. Yeah. I think what keeps people stuck in that fear, or stuck in the place where they are because they are afraid, they consciously know, if I step through this, there could be more and better on the other side. But it's comfortable here. And I say comfortable, not meaning necessarily like, oh, it's all cozy. It's cozy and warm. It's familiar. And that's what makes it comfortable.
Yeah. It's very uncomfortable, really.
Right. But you're so used to it. You're just like,
Yes.
well, this is what
Yep.
it is. So it's hard to imagine that it could be different.
Yeah.
And you mentioned changing things on a cellular level. So we're talking here about, it wasn't just a decision like, oh, you know what? I'm going to not be how I was yesterday. I'm going to be different today.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
a conscious decision, and you have to change a lot more than that.
Yeah. I'm so glad it's not that easy. That sounds terrible for me to say, but honestly, the growth process is the best thing. It's the best thing about life, right? And we would never want to take it away from someone. And so if you're stuck in the fear, yeah, we feel for you, but I mean, I feel a hope that the system works and everything about this universe works. And so we can love everything about it safely. And we learn to love everything about it as we grow. And I'm talking as a person who has spent days, weeks, months, years in pain, and I wouldn't take one moment of that away because I needed it to choose what was better and to realize the difference, right? Because if we just automatically chose and just said, oh, okay, I'm going to be good now, then we would have no appreciation for where we've gotten. But the pain, the life in general, gives us all the feedback we know we need to appreciate it, to be willing to pay the price.
Yeah. Well, and we live in this universe of duality. So you have to have hot to know cold.
Yes. Yep.
The both sides of the coin exist at all times.
Yeah, I think, at the beginning, my wife and I, along with my sister, have started a company doing work with people, mainly with entrepreneurs and people who are starting coaching businesses. And at the beginning, we wanted to take the pain away. Like, we wanted to make it faster. And what we've learned over the last year is that we can't do that. And in fact, we want to be there with them as they're growing, but we don't have the power to take it away, and ultimately we wouldn't want to, it's so hard for me to say this, but we wouldn't want to take it all away. It would be bad for them, if you follow me.
Yes, I do. And that is so interesting and so different from a lot of coaches who coach other coaches. They're just like, hey, you can be a success in 90 days. Just follow this path. And then everybody who follows is disappointed when it doesn't work for them. And you're presenting a much more realistic approach to it. And
Anyway, we paid a lot, not just in natural treasure, but also in, experience to figure this out. But it does feel way better when we just acknowledge that we need the process. We absolutely need the process. And, to speak to what we were talking about leading into this around making that choice, I'll just give you an example. Mm-hmm. Last year, my wife did hypnotherapy, and it had a lot to do with, she worked for her dad for 20 years, and then as she left, it was, she had a lot of, emotional pain around that, and even just all the realizations around, it's a big, long story. I don't know how to sum it up. But anyway, she chose hypnotherapy to kind of work through it. Okay. And when she first did it, I was like, wow, you're just so brave. I'm amazed. And I was kind of peeking in the door a little bit as she was doing it. I was like, what's going on? Like, how is she willing to do this? And then I definitely wasn't. And then like 3 months later, I was like, I'm going to do this. I want to do it. And the thing was, like, when I quit my job last May, I thought everything would just flow really well. I had a good business coach, my wife. I had my sister who was helping me with my podcast and who was a great, like, online business manager. I figured I had everything, right? But I didn't realize what I was going to really go through. And work for me from 12 years old was how I coped. I loved work. I loved everything I did. Everyone I worked for, every job I had, whether it was picking rocks, detasseling, all the miserable jobs I loved. And suddenly I didn't have a job. And so that process led me to be like, you know what? I need to know what I don't know. And I don't have the time to experience. Like, if you think about it, if we're going to grow, do we really have the time through experiences to find every little thing along the way? And I realized I don't. And I can't. I don't have enough funds to support that. Mm-hmm. So I chose to do hypnotherapy. And that was one of the things that made a big difference in the last year.
Is that something that you offer now in your coaching business, or do you leave that to somebody else?
Yeah, we leave that to someone else. Serena Talbot is who I did hypnotherapy with. She's here in Wisconsin.
Okay.
I think that just like anything, like, you want to find the person that's right for you, right?
Yeah.
Like, I wouldn't necessarily recommend you just go find a coach that's on a list and say, oh, I want to work with this person. Coaching is, and definitely hypnotherapy, and Serena's very special, but we want to find the person that's right for us, right? And she was right for me. She's a good friend now.
That's cool. That's what everybody needs to do, whether it's finding a coach, finding a hypnotherapist, finding a meditation practice, or any spiritual practice. because we can listen to what other people are doing and say, that's interesting, like learn from them, and then try it out and go, but it's not for me. And I'm always recommending that people continue testing, if you will, trying out different things to find what works for them. And there's no shame or, don't be discouraged if the first 5 things don't work. Keep going, because there is something that will work and you will find it.
Yeah. I think, we have to get more intuitive, right?
Yes.
Like you say, the testing. This is for guys. Women are naturally more intuitive.
But they don't always listen to it.
I know they don't. But I think one thing culturally, it's safe for you guys, like from you as women. To a certain extent, that's how you survive. But guys have been, and I'm not saying there's no generalities here that will work. But we have been sedated when it comes to intuition, really.
Yeah.
Like we haven't how many of us have really been in battle or anything that would cause us to realize it's the only way recently? Like I'm not saying there's a lot of guys that are intuitive in some ways, but we need to rediscover as a gender at a much higher level what intuition is for guys. And that's one of the things I'm working on with a few of them.
Yeah, that's really important work, because I think you're right. Everybody is intuitive, regardless of gender. It's just a matter of tapping into it, allowing yourself to tap into it, being exposed to the fact that it even exists. You hear the term women's intuition all the time, but we all have it. So yeah. Very cool. So what you're doing is are you working exclusively with men as a leadership coach, right?
No, I thought I would be, but I'm definitely supporting some women, especially women coaches. More from a coaching standpoint, I guess. With guys, I'm working as an executive coach, doing both what I would call like mental healing and energy work and coaching. That's where my gifts are, is not just in coaching, but it's kind of a combination of all of them that I've gained through this process of healing myself. With women, I mostly do coaching, just because like they've already got, especially I'm already working, like the ones I'm working with so far are healers or coaches, and they've got a lot of intuitive people in their network that can help them, and they're more intuitive, like we already talked about. So I help more from a coaching standpoint, just coming alongside them and believing with them in the process. Because too many women are not really have not fully allowed themselves to believe in what they offer. You guys, you can feel it. Sorry, I don't want to again generalize, but this is the people I'm working with. It's like there's like all this talent, and then we don't fully see it, and got to step into that.
That happens a lot. Yes, that we can't see our own power, our own gifts. And I remember a mentor of mine saying many years ago that something to the effect of he was holding belief in me until I could see it for myself.
Yep, that's right. That's beautiful. Yeah, he's obviously knows what he's talking about. That's really powerful.
Yes, learned a lot from him. So thank you again so much for joining me in this conversation. Before we go, I was going to say my favorite question. I love asking all the questions, but I am especially interested in this question. And you have just such a low-key energy about you. So when you need an extra boost of energy, do you have a hype song? And what is it?
Oh, wow. Huh. That's interesting. I probably should. I'm like I sing. I'm a barbershopper. Don't force me to.
I know. I won't ask you to, but I could totally picture that.
I think that right now, anything that Home Free sings, just partially because some of them are in my voice range, would be my go-to.
Okay.
But I love so many different types of music that it's hard for me to pick.
Yeah.
I appreciate. I mean, I could probably say just as much to jazz, or now that I understand opera, yeah, it's all beautiful. One of my favorite artists, just because she's so inspiring, is, I'm not going to remember her name now that I've brought it up, but yeah, I totally forgot. There's a young lady that started at like 4 singing, and she inspires me. So there's so many singers that inspire me. It's hard to answer that question, but I guess right now probably the biggest ones are either Home Free or the Oak Ridge Boys, because I've seen them in person. And I remember the 82-year-old, the last time I saw him, which was right during COVID, jumping and dancing and running around the stage, and just so happy to be out again after COVID.
Yeah.
And so he's inspiring for me too. Anyone that's older that really is living their purpose is very inspiring.
Is there a particular Oak Ridge Boys song that you like better than the others?
So I think for Home Free it'd be one is In the Blood.
Okay.
There's some good questions in that song. And for the Oak Ridge Boys, there's
No worries.
Names and Me.
That's
Song
okay.
names and stuff. It's so hard. But they have a new album, and there's I think there's like a railroad song. Sorry. So that's as close as I can get.
Okay.
I have to look it up.
We can put that in the show notes so people can find it there. How about that?
Okay.
All right.
I'll email you.
And if they want to continue a conversation with you, Kevin, where's the best place for people to find you?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me also at kevingwhite.com and then beliefcrew.com.
Okay, cool. I'll put links in the show notes for that as well.
All right. Thank you very much.
And thank you
Nice
so
to
much
talk
for
to you.
joining me here on Fine is a 4-letter word.
Thank you. Appreciate it.